our interview that you and I recorded yesterday tonight. And now this happened at approximately 2:55 or 3 p.m. Central Time. I was doing a live interview when my wife entered the room and showed me the news on her laptop that Charlie Kirk had been shot at an event at Utah Valley University. Now, early reports are he was shot in the neck. Of course, I prayed immediately he would survive. He has passed. Charlie Kirk, dead, September 10th, 2025. It's with a heavy heart I wanted to bring you back on and get your thoughts, Harley.
Well, I was, in fact, at about 12 o'clock Eastern Time today, I received a call from our office in New York, and they wanted to discuss the security situation that we're facing. Because, as you know, we've been targeted in the past by the Ukrainian Secret Service, myself, Helga, Diane Sayre, and a number of others. And also, we're organizing at the United Nations to insist that there be action taken against the genocide being committed by Israel. And today at about noon, Diane Sayre received an email that basically said, "You're going to end up where Lyndon LaRouche is very soon." It was a death threat. She took it to the police. The police immediately said they would investigate. And then 2 hours later, we hear what happened to Charlie Kirk. Now, as we discussed yesterday, ominously, this is the kind of period where these kinds of wet works take place. And what we're dealing with is a very desperate financial oligarchy that is committed to do whatever it takes to sustain their power. And, targeting a young, charismatic political figure like Charlie Kirk shows that there's nothing that's off limits. And I think I would hope that the Secret Service can be trusted to provide a very close ring to protect Donald Trump right now.
I got to tell you, Harley, got the same feelings coursing through my veins that I had in July when they took that pot shot in Butler, Pennsylvania at President Trump. Same exact feelings. I will remember for the rest of my life where I was when Charlie Kirk was shot. Now, I just want to clarify for the audience, the man shown here is evidently not the man who shot Charlie Kirk. This man was taken into custody briefly, but then it was released that Charlie was shot at a distance of approximately 200 yards by a
Yeah.
sniper who remains on the loose. These goddamned evil leftist murdering effers and their deep state masters need to burn in hell. I'll leave the forgiveness to God, Harley. We've got this statement from Donald J. Trump. The great and legendary Charlie Kirk is dead. No one understood or had the heart of the youth in the USA better than Charlie. He was loved and admired by all, especially me, and now he's no longer with us. Melania and my sympathies go out to his beautiful wife, Erica, and family. Charlie, we love you. He was the husband to Erica and the father to a daughter and a son. And
Two
now
young
he's
children.
and now he's dead by an assassin's bullet. This abomination must be avenged, I wrote. Hunt Charlie's murderer to the ends of the earth, Donald Trump. Assassinated by a sniper from 200 yards? Deep state evil in the wide open. I don't think this was some normie, Harley, not from 200 yards, and they shot him right in the neck, right in the jugular. It was a direct hit, right? He bled out right then and there.
Yeah, I saw that. It was posted by Sarah Westall. I wouldn't assume that this was some leftist. This is above the left-right political fight. This is the intelligence agencies. And they're the ones who have the snipers who can do this. They're the ones who have the reason to do this. Not just that they're taking out someone who's a very influential young person, especially influential with young Republicans, but someone who represents the future, a future outside of the control of the deep state. And it's meant as a signal, a warning to anyone out there who will stand up against them. And I think, this is, as I said, it's a very ominous moment. I don't know if you got the news today from France, but the French government is putting 80,000 soldiers in the street to protect the collapsed government of Macron because they don't trust the people. This is an extremely wild situation. You had the assassination or the attempted assassination of Hamas leaders in Doha yesterday, where the Israelis just went into an ally of the United States, Qatar, with missiles and shot up buildings to try and kill their supposed enemies. So anything goes right now, and we better get this thing under control quickly.
Well, I got to tell you, I don't want to show the video. I won't play it because I don't want the gunshot to ring out. I think it's important to illustrate for the audience he had just finished speaking when he was shot in the neck and he was bleeding out right there. It was a direct hit. I'm sorry to show that, guys, but it has to be on the historical record. These
Yeah.
Vipers, the International Assassination Bureau, as you call it, Harley, we cover that in the interview you and I recorded yesterday when we discussed the sudden deaths of 7 AfD Party members. People who want to merely make Germany great again, dropping dead like flies. Harley, this is an abomination. I'll give you the final word, and I thank you so much for coming back on today, on short notice to get this on the historical record.
Well, and it's important that that happened because otherwise people get vague memories, they forget, and they try to go on with business as usual. But this is not business as usual. We're seeing the collapse of an empire, and there's nothing more dangerous than imperial oligarchs when they're losing their power. And that's what we're seeing right now. And so as long as people understand that's what the fight is, it means you've got to become political. You can't ignore this. And I know a lot of your viewers are aware of that, but it's now or never that we get a mobilization, an army of citizens that will stand up and fight to defend the freedoms that we take for granted from our constitutional republic, because we're about to lose it.
I've got goosebumps. My heart breaks. Humanity has hit a new low. September 10th, 2025, the collapse of empire and the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Okay, one last question for you, Harley. One last
Sure.
question for you. Charlie cared deeply about the Republic, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. I've never heard anybody who could have a conversation with anybody, including leftist students at universities. This university was packed. It was like a rock concert. Thousands of students there to hear Charlie speak. Just speak. We now live in a society where if you dare to speak truth, you might be assassinated in front of those thousands of people. I guess my question for you, Harley, is this. As much as Charlie was somebody who unconditionally supported Israel, and that's where he and I differ, I really admired the guy across the board in every other way. Why Charlie Kirk? Why did they assassinate Charlie Kirk today, of all people?
Well, remember, Sean, on the Israel question, he at first was backing away from complete support for Israel. He also was very upset about the way the Justice Department was handling the Epstein case. So he took a principled stand on a couple of issues, and he came under attack from people like Ben Shapiro and others. And he then said he thought about it and he changed his mind on this because he said he trusted the president and the president's team. Well, there's a lesson there. You know, what Reagan used to say, trust but verify. We've got to make sure that the people we elect know that if they take a wrong turn, they're going to hear from us. And on the other side of it, that if they do what's right, they'll have the full support of the American people. And I think that's the issue here. The American people, we have to get our act together. This is the 250th year of our republic, the Declaration of Independence. People should study what it means to be an American and what privileges we have because of that, but also what responsibilities we have. Charlie was someone who believed deeply in this idea of freedom. I disagreed with him on certain things, but he certainly was a powerful figure who could express himself beautifully. And this is a tragedy for the country.
You know, as I'm reflecting on this, Harley, you're the historian. I feel very privileged that you're able to come on right now. This literally just happened an hour ago, hour and a half ago. I feel very privileged because when we talk about the collapse of empire and the assassination of Charlie Kirk, it needs to be said that this is exactly what happens when empires crumble. When the
Yeah.
enemies of the people become desperate, this is what has happened historically throughout time. They start assassinating the leadership of the revolution.
Well, and keep in mind that what we're seeing in Germany, which I will tell you that I talked to some of my friends who said there's a full investigation underway into what's happening to the deaths of these seven AfD candidates. And they don't want to say something until they have some evidence. But what they also pointed out is that the investigation is going to be done by the same people who refused to investigate the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, enough said. All right, guys, if you're not sure that there is a war being waged against the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, look no further than the sick, demented people on Twitter celebrating the murder, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Harley, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Guys, we'll say our goodbyes to Harley now, and then we will begin the full interview that Harley and I recorded yesterday after these short words. Thanks so much for being here, guys.
But under the Clintons, the Bushes, the Bidens, the Obamas, we've gone the way of the old British Empire. And that is collapsing. And the global South, where a lot of the money was looted from and resources and so on, they're now saying no more. They're going to use the resources for their people, for their country. So are we going to go in and fight everyone and demand that we continue the old imperial neo-colonial policies? It won't work.
Hey, friends, welcome back. That was Harley Schlanger, who sums it up nicely. China, India, and Russia would like the United States to play ball with the new system that is clearly coming into fruition. But the bankers who control the United States, they continue to want their new world order. Meanwhile, 7 AfD candidates, that's the Make Germany Great Again party, have died suddenly, and the chances of that happening naturally? Well, more than 1 in 16 quadrillion. This and much more in my conversation with Harley Schlanger. Thanks for tuning in, friends. Before we start, just a quick word about a great sponsor. A growing body of research shows that when you diet, your body fights back. Levels of ghrelin, the hunger hormone, shoot up, while leptin, the hormone that signals fullness, drops. That's why most diets feel like an endless battle. The more weight you try to lose, the hungrier you get. It's not a willpower issue, it's literally biology. This is why you'll want to try my secret weight loss weapon. BioTrust's GLP-1 Elevate is designed to naturally trigger your body's own weight loss signals without drugs, prescriptions, or needles. It helps satiate and gives you a feeling of fullness, reduces cravings, reduces hunger hormones, and helps lose fat instead of muscle, while supporting healthy blood sugar levels. Be sure to grab a bottle right now while it's 50% off and start experiencing real results only at trimwithsgt.com. Plus, by ordering right now, you're also guaranteed 2 free ebooks titled The 3-Week Diet and 53 Fat-Burning Smoothies and Milkshakes. That's trimwithsgt.com. The link is below. Hey, friends, welcome back. Thanks so much for being here. International and national news being covered in this one with our returning guest, expert, and friend, Harley Schlanger, who was just elected president of the LaRouche organization. Friends, in this one, we're going to talk about those 7 AfD candidates in Germany who died suddenly, we're told of natural causes. Meanwhile, France's government in complete and total meltdown. And let me tell you this, guys. Candace Owens' expose on Brigitte's genitals is the least of their problems. Harley Schlanger is back. How are you, Harley?
I'm fine, Sean. That's a good place to start.
You find that amusing? Have you been watching Candace's expose on Brigitte's little man
Oh,
bump?
oh, sure.
Well, they're trying to sue Candace Owens, so now she'll get the pleasure of discovery because she's a bulldog and she's not going to give up. Meanwhile, Macron just lost a confidence vote. How do you say that? A no confidence vote?
The no confidence vote. There was a brought up by both the left and the right demanded a vote of no confidence in the prime minister, Francois Bayrou. And it was an overwhelming vote against the government. And Macron said before the vote that if it's lost, he'll try to get a new prime minister. If not, his options are elections or rule by decree. Now, it's interesting. Macron is about 15% in the polls, and he's going to assert himself as a dictator of France. So what's happening is a meltdown of the economy, and it's something that we predicted a while ago.
Let me return to you, Harley. It's really interesting to hear you note that if the people of France are on the edge of a revolution, they're demanding that France pull out of the EU. They want Macron to resign, and yet you're saying he may rule by decree like Zelensky?
Exactly. He may play the Zelensky card. Look, the problem you have in France is that there's a long-term degradation of the physical economy. They still have one advantage over Germany, which is they still have nuclear power, and that's where they get a lot of their electricity. But they've shut down whole sections of industry. They've lost some of their client states in Africa, Niger, Burkina Faso, and for what was French West Africa. They basically kicked the French out. And the problem is that the trade inside Europe is declining very significantly. You have this irony, you have the so-called E3 countries, England, France, and Germany, that are asserting themselves as sort of a new core of NATO, the tough guys who are going to take on Russia. And the French have some nuclear weapons, but the French military is not interested in a war with Russia. The British military does want a war with Russia, but they just have a few pop guns. They've got very little in terms of weaponry. And Merits in Germany is somewhere at around 21, 22%, which may be the highest level of the three of them. But how are you going to have governments with leaders in just barely above single digits in popularity? How are they going to rally the population to go to a war that they can't afford and that the young people won't fight? So it's a real Potemkin village or paper tiger, as Chairman Mao used to say about Europe. And it's clear to the people in Europe that you can't trust these guys.
Well, how could you trust them? How could you trust the man in the foreground when he's married to a man masquerading as a woman, in my opinion, allegedly? In addition to that, he was a Rothschild banker who the actual bankers said the man had no business being in the building. He was an idiot. He was obviously a plant. He was obviously there because of nepotism, because of whatever the plan was, the agenda to put this man into power. How could they possibly trust this Rothschild agent? I think the world is waking up. I continue to say it. Meanwhile, in Nepal, guys, absolute chaos in the streets after a social media ban. The politicians were literally pulled from their beds. The prime minister resigned. The finance minister was dragged through the streets. I think the temperature's rising around the world, Harley. We're all fed up with these bankers that throw the people under the bus.
Let me give you another example. The cockpit of war, the Balkan countries, former Yugoslavia, there's a major operation underway. I have an associate, a friend of mine, Alex Kreiner. Maybe you've seen him. He's doing a lot of podcasting. He's a former financial analyst, but Alex was just in Croatia, and he said that MI6 and CIA are all over the place. And this, of course, is where in the 1990s, Bill Clinton took the United States into a bombing attack on Serbia. There's tension between Serbia and Croatia. Albania. Albania is a center of along with Bosnia, of Muslim terror groups. And these are Muslim terror groups that are essentially run out of London. So you have the historic cockpit of war, the Balkans. And what is the issue there? Well, they're trying to make the issue that Vučić, the president of Serbia, is too close to Putin and Russia.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, they're blowing up the pipelines, the oil pipelines that go through Turkey and go through Romania that provide cheap oil and gas to some of these Eastern European countries. Now you have Poland starting to break from this. The European Union is headed toward an explosion. But now that you see the Balkans, you see the situation in France. Let me say one other thing about France. You remember the Yellow Vest movement?
Yeah.
The truckers, and the truckers linked up with the farmers. Something similar to what happened in Canada. And Macron did everything he could to shut it down by having the banks cut off credit to the farms. And what the French farmers do is they march to the houses of the mayors and spray them with cow manure. Now, that's the nicest thing they do. There's a plan for a meeting this weekend to pull together all the opposition. And this includes the Marine Le Pen grouping, the National Front. And keep in mind, look what they did to Marine Le Pen to try and prevent her from coming to power, because she's right now the most popular figure in France. They convicted her on a bogus charge, and they tried to keep her off the ballot between now and the next election in 2027. In England, Starmer is at about 10%. His deputy prime minister, Angela Rayner, just had to resign. And what you have now is a team of Blairites, the old Tony Blair, one of the most corrupt men on the planet, are rallying around Starmer to try and save him. One of the key guys there is a guy named Jonathan Powell, who is Blair's chief of staff. He's now Starmer's chief of staff. You know what his job has been the last 3 years?
No.
Syria.
Oh.
Make the Syria jihadis seem like reasonable people. And he spent a lot of his time in Syria. And right now in Syria, the Christian population is in hiding. The various ethnic non-Sunni Muslims are in hiding. There are massacres going on, and it's not being reported. And Israel is, of course, bombing Syria and moving in to take over the Golan Heights completely, which is an area where there is some water and good agricultural land. So the meanies have been unleashed everywhere. And it's because the financial system is blowing out. And it's also because the alliance that has emerged of an alternative system is growing. The fact that Prime Minister Modi of India turned his back on the West and went to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting last week and was seen arm in arm with Putin and Xi Jinping. The Indians have moved to a rapprochement with China. And what we're being told by people like John Bolton and Steve Bannon and others is that this is a threat to the United States. But if you read the speeches, Xi and Putin both said, we would like the West to become a part of this with us. So what we're seeing is a war propaganda coming from precisely the people you identified who control Macron. The Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the City of London, the Lazard Frere interests. These are the global bankers, and their idea of a new world order is a central banker's dictatorship. What Xi and Putin are talking about is cooperation for economic development of the physical economy, including using national currencies, gold, and a form of digital currencies that are not run by central banks. So there's two competing systems, and one is collapsing, and the one that's collapsing is going for war.
So the Rothschild bankers, the Rockefeller bankers, the central banks, the Federal Reserve, all the central banks around the world are controlled by these people. These people are willing to burn everything down to try to maintain their power. Is that what you're saying? Because it sure seems like that's what they are willing and able to do. They want endless war with Russia. They're madmen, Harley. They're going to burn it
They,
all down?
well, obviously they'd rather not have that happen, but they've kicked the can down the road for too long. Remember, what we saw, think about the last 50 years, or 60 years. Uh, we had a banking crisis in the end of the 60s, early 70s that led to the end of the gold reserve system for the dollar. The dollar remained the international currency, but it was no longer backed by gold. And what happened successively over year after year was the bankers carried out deregulation. Now, some of the regulations in some areas are distinctly bad. There's no question about that. But banking regulation was to keep away power from the largest banks, the so-called too big to fail banks. They wiped away all forms of regulation. So what they created was a situation where they could literally steal the deposits of their clients. And that's written into the Dodd-Frank bill, that if the banks get into serious trouble, they can seize your deposits and count them as their assets. Now, what would they do if they did that? They would use that as the basis of leverage to issue more fiat currency through the Federal Reserve, the central bank. This is what they've been doing going back to the 2007, 2008 crisis. Remember the mortgage-backed security bubble popped? What do? They put 20 trillion into the too big to fail banks and took away about 5 million families' homes. They shut down family farms. They cut off credit to businesses and did everything they could to make interest rates low to provide cash to the bankers who had bet everything on mortgage-backed securities. It happened again in 2019 with the repo crisis. And this is something people don't know much about, but what the repo crisis was is that every day corporations have to settle their books. And they often have debts coming due, and they have to borrow money. So banks loan money to corporations on a 24-hour basis so that banks are able to show that they have credit to back what's outstanding on their books. In other words, they back the face value of their financial instruments with quick money from the Federal Reserve. But then they have to pay it back. How do they pay it back? Well, they borrow more. And this is where a lot of the debt, the federal debt, is coming from. Actually, much of this is off books. And it was estimated that there was Neil Barofsky, who ran the TARP plan in 2008 through 2011, estimated $24 trillion went to bail out the too big to fail banks in that period. After 2019, 2020, with quantitative easing and low interest rates, over $1 trillion a day was loaned, or it was created by the Federal Reserve, given to the big banks that loaned it to the bankrupt corporations to defend the value of instruments on their books. And then the next day they had to do swaps to get more cash to pay back what they borrowed the night before. That's why we have this deficit, because we don't have a physical goods economy backing up the money supply. We don't have a credit system. We have a speculative Ponzi scheme. And that's, I know Mitch Firestein has written this book, Ponzi Planet. That's what he's describing. And that's what the Federal Reserve System is. Now, Sean, what do you do if you have something like that? It's called bankruptcy reorganization, but it's so big that if it's done haphazardly, everybody loses their pensions. Everybody loses their savings and retirement. So you need to have an orderly bankruptcy reorganization, which penalizes the banksters who are the crooks. And that's the thing that you have to do. And the problem is that they own the Congress.
Hmm. Well, they own everything, don't they? They own all of the most important corporations, all of the most important investment companies, BlackRock, Fidelity, State Street. By the way, guys, our dollar is in its death throes. It's time to get serious about protecting what you have left. Harley, for the first time in history, the U.S. is spending more on debt interest than on defense. And the national debt, they just keep on printing, Harley. What is $3,650 gold telling you?
Well, it's telling me that if you're holding dollars, you're losing. You know, the euro, which is in bad shape, is gaining on the dollar. And the problem is when Trump is asking for lower interest rates, in a certain sense, he's right to do that. But the problem is the lower interest rates will just be used to print more money to back up bad debt. And that's why, and one of the key things Lyndon LaRouche pointed to, and when he talked about a Hamiltonian system, is that Hamilton made this point that a national debt in itself is not a problem if you have the means to extinguish it. In other words, if the debt is accumulated by lending for things that produce something of value, what happens when you're producing paper credit for things that have no value, like a financial derivative, like a swaption, like a foreign exchange note? The, what's valued on Wall Street is the net accounting figure that's on the books. And how do you protect it? Well, you just need a little bit of cash when the payment comes due. But what happens, and that's just the interest. What you're talking about, John, it's now over a trillion, 1.2 trillion, I think, is the debt service for the US budget for this year. That doesn't even touch the total debt. That's just the interest on the debt. And kicking the can down the road just extends this. I always use the example, it's like paying a mortgage with a high interest rate credit card.
Yep. Yep. And you mentioned that China, so Xi and Putin and India, they made mention that they would like the United States to be part of this new reorganization of the global economy, right? They're not trying to necessarily keep the United States out. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Meanwhile, the United States is headed down this Tether, Bitcoin, stablecoin path. And I've been saying for a long time that is to defend the dollar. Now, Special advisor to Putin, Anton Kobyakov, just said it's a scheme to shove $35 trillion in debt into crypto, devalue it, and reset the system. I don't know. Have you seen this video? Do you want to see this, Harley?
Well, I know what he's saying because this is what they're saying now in Europe, that there's a great deal of concern about the move to stable coin and things of that sort, because it's using crypto to, in a sense, do what they did previously with derivatives and with mortgage-backed securities.
Yeah.
It's creating debt using new instruments and claiming that they're commoditizing it, but it's not a commodity. There's a big difference between basing spending on coal production and electricity production and food production, as opposed to basing creating credit against credit. And that's, in a sense, the original idea of blockchain was to have a system so you could track flows of funds to catch criminals and money launderers and others. That's why the system was initially created. Instead, it's now being created as a new, bigger speculative bubble.
Yeah, and I worry about it. I'm a Bitcoin guy. You know, I hold some Bitcoin, but I'm starting to really sense a problem with what's going on here as the world might be forced to move away from the United States.
That's exactly the point. What we've been doing, the tariff policy, which, again, here's where you see the problem that we have with President Trump. He's got some good ideas. He wants to invest in industry. He wants to have tax credits so the companies will have access to credit they can put into new plant and equipment and so on. But unless that's written into the law, what do these companies do? they take the money they get for tax credits and buy more speculative instruments. And so unless you have some kind of mechanism, and here's where it gets touchy. This whole question of a new world order, new world economic order. I mean, the Bush uh, new world order, the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. Now, who's running the World Economic Forum? It's Larry Fink.
Mm.
What's their view? Their view is that if you're on the inside, then you can create credit for your own interests to back up your own investments, and the hell with everything else. And that's the way it's going. Now, this is where the United States government under Hamilton, Washington, Lincoln, McKinley, when we had a tariff policy, when we had a credit policy, what did they do? The government did create money in some cases, but how do they create it? Through the Congress to have credit for investment in rail and steel production and energy production, in defense if you're in the middle of a war. That's how the American credit system works. But it got hijacked, especially after the killing of John Kennedy and then Nixon, who took the gold dollar off the gold reserve. Nixon didn't really know what he was doing. That was an insurrection inside the White House run by Paul Volcker, Henry Kissinger, and George Shultz.
Yep.
And Volcker, after the Nixon and Ford administration, Volcker became Carter's guy. And what was his policy? The controlled disintegration of the economy, by which he meant make sure that money is not siphoned off into industry and long-term projects, because that money is necessary for financial speculation.
Yep.
And that's what he meant by controlled disintegration. That was the Project 1980s of the Trilateral Commission. And then from there, it just became more and more extreme. And so, the question that really should be posed is, why do we have a financial system in the United States that for now 112 years has been unconstitutional? Why do we believe this idea of the independence of the Fed? The Fed is not independent. It's owned by the 5 largest private banks through the New York Federal Reserve. And they're the ones who set credit policy, not the Congress. Now, granted, the current Congress is pretty rotten, but the whole idea of a sovereign nation is you elect legislators who act for the general interests of their constituents. And that's what we have to get back to. What does that mean, Sean? It means the American people have to speak up. And we're seeing in France and in Great Britain, in Germany, in the Balkans, you mentioned Nepal, Japan, the Prime Minister of Japan just resigned. Governments are going through turmoil because they don't know what to do. And the ones that think they know what to do are the ones that are going with austerity and war.
Yeah. Well, that brings us back to Germany, and I want to talk about the AfD Party. That's essentially the Make Germany Great Again party. And Merz says tackling Germany's economic woes tougher than expected. Well, when you have nothing but open borders, insane anti-human green carbon schemes, and blown up pipelines, it does get a little difficult to run an economy properly. So meanwhile, we have these wonderful AfD candidates just dropping dead like flies. Now, according to this tweet over here on X, 6 AfD candidates in Germany's North Rhine, how do you say that, Harley? Westphalia region, are suddenly died of natural causes. And what do you notice? Natural death is what's being focused on by the mainstream media. Is it 6 or 7 AfD candidates recently died?
It's 7 now. And of course, I have some friends in the AfD. I have worked with them, given some advice to them. And some of them came to the Trump inauguration. They're very supportive of the overall idea of Make America Great Again. But they see making Germany great again means working with Russia, not working with the City of London. And the problem in Europe is that nations gave up their sovereignty in return for the golden billion that comes from the speculative uh, offshore islands, the markets that are controlled by the City of London banks. Now, who is Merz? Merz was the head of BlackRock in Germany. So you have a BlackRock chancellor who comes in and says, gee, it's going to be harder than we thought to fix the economy. Well, he's completely reversed everything he campaigned on. He campaigned on keeping the debt down. And the first thing he did after he was elected was to raise the debt ceiling, essentially. He immediately joined with Starmer and Macron, saying we have to go all out to build the army in Ukraine to beat Russia. Now, there's a really interesting statement by the French Prime Minister Bayrou, who just got kicked out. Right before the vote, he said to the legislators, gentlemen in the national legislature, you can bring down a government, but you can't bring down reality. Now, the problem is they don't know what reality is. They actually believe, some of these guys, that a war with Russia will enable them to break apart Russia and grab the resources the way it was being done in the 1990s. The problem is this isn't the 1990s. In the 1990s, the Soviet Union had collapsed because communism was not a good system. The economy was bankrupted. And then what happened was they used shock therapy to loot more. They sent in London and Wall Street bankers. People like Larry Summers were brought in. Bill Browder were brought in to figure out, what does Russia have that we can steal? And they took some KGB agents and made them the oligarchs to run these essentially Western corporations. And Russia underwent a demographic crisis. The life expectancy for men fell from 73 to 65 in a 10-year period. It was a disaster. And it was out of that you had a guy named Primakov who came up with this idea of Russia, China, and India working together. And Primakov was then followed up by Vladimir Putin. And we're told Putin's KGB agent, he's a communist, he's this and that. He's a religious nationalist. And what he's done has been somewhat miraculous because he's gone to the oligarchs. He's jailed some of them. He said, if you guys want to have your standard of living, your riches and so on, you have to put money into the Russian economy. And as a result, with all the sanctions and everything else and the war in Ukraine, Russia's economy is still growing. And then you look at China, and you can say what you want about Chinese communism. They've created a middle class of 350 million people. Their standard of living has gone way up. People in China, if you talk to people who have gone there from the West, are generally happy. They have cars now, they have houses, they have futures. They're traveling to Europe. I was just in Sardinia, off the island off the coast of Italy. And who do you see there? You see Chinese tourists, and the Italians don't have money except the Chinese are coming in and buying things. So what Putin and Xi are saying is that what we're doing in Eurasia is working. We're looking to mine resources. We're looking to develop energy. We're looking to increase transportation or lower transportation costs by improving the infrastructure. And as a result, they're lifting people out of poverty. And this is the model they're using is very much the Hamiltonian model of credit for entrepreneurs. The Chinese are turning out more scientists from their universities every year than we have cumulatively in the West. And they're looking at science and technology, space, nuclear fusion. All of these things are things we were doing 20, 30 years ago. But under the Clintons, the Bushes, the Bidens, the Obamas, we've gone the way of the old British Empire. And that is collapsing. And the global South, where a lot of the money was looted from and resources and so on, they're now saying no more. they're going to use the resources for their people, for their country. So are we going to go in and fight everyone and demand that we continue the old imperial neo-colonial policies? It won't work. And this is the problem that Trump has right now, is to figure out how to work with Putin, Xi Jinping. I think Trump has had it with Europe, rightfully so. My advice to him on Europe is let the Europeans go through their own self-inflicted misery, and maybe something will change in Europe. But the rest of the world is moving in a different direction.
Well, let's not bury the lead. Let's go back to this development.
Yeah, the AfD.
This is really, really concerning. Let this sink in. So, a seventh AfD party candidate has been, shall we say suicided? I don't know, Harley. My words, not yours. But these are young men. These are not men who should just be dropping dead like flies. And by the way, we'll let Paul Joseph Watson do the heavy lifting on the statistical probability of 7 of these candidates all dying in such a short time prior to what, a September 14th election? We're having this conversation on September 9th. Listen to this, guys.
A total of 7 AfD political candidates have now suddenly died within about 2 weeks of each other in the same region of Germany, ahead of local elections coming up in North Rhine-Westphalia later this month. Conspiracy or bizarre coincidence? Professor Stefan Homburg called the death statistically impossible, and that was when there'd only been 4. Now there's been 3 more. Professor Richard Werner said the odds of it happening naturally are infinitesimally different from 0. I asked Grok what the statistical probability of this happening naturally was, and after an exhaustive analysis it said, wait for it, roughly 1 in 19 quintillion.
1 in 19 quintillion. Huh.
Joe, let me tell you something about the North Rhine-Westphalia and why this is the location. This is in Western Germany, which has been a hard place for the AfD to crack. The main support for the AfD has been in Eastern Germany and Southern Germany, the old communist sector, where people are looking at the situation in Germany and saying this is just as bad as it was in East Germany. And so the AfD is 35 to 45% in the eastern part of the country. But in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is a highly industrialized area, they were getting about 2 to 4%. But all of a sudden, in 2022, it jumped to 16%. Why? Because the auto sector was being dismantled. The loss of cheap Russian oil and gas was driving electricity prices up, was the shift to electric cars didn't work. And the auto sector is the driver of the German economy. And so all of a sudden in North Rhine-Westphalia, the AfD is polling at about 25 to 30%. If they can draw 25% in Western Germany, on top of what they're getting in Eastern Germany, they will become the government. Now, the Western line on this is that the AfD are Nazis, that they're anti-Semites. Well, I can tell you, it's complete bullshit. Where they disagree is with the idea of, well, the key issue for them is sovereignty. They want Germany to be a sovereign nation. They want the people to be able to make decisions, not the oligarchs like Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas and the unelected bureaucrats of Brussels. And so this is an insurgency. And as a result, the decision was made 6 months ago to ban the AfD. But they had such a strong showing in the most recent election that the government backed away from that a little bit. Now, as the governing parties are collapsing and the AfD is surging, they're revisiting the idea of banning the party. And it's the Social Democrats and the Greens that were 2 of the 3 parties in the previous coalition that have collapsed. They're down to 10, 12% of the vote. They're now asking their coalition partner, Merz, to ban the AfD. Now, it's in this context that all of a sudden you have this completely improbable case of 7 party leaders dying. And that's the background here. Look, what this brings up is the old Operation Gladio, the
Yep.
International Assassination Bureau. There's something here that doesn't that's just incongruous. And there is an investigation, an internal investigation in the AfD, and I expect that within the next couple of weeks they'll be putting out some kind of a report.
Well, I got to tell you, as the Nakba unrolls in Gaza, literally Netanyahu is telling people to evacuate northern Gaza right now. Where are they going to go? So, amidst that outrage, this should be one of the biggest stories in the world because it reminds me a lot of Andrew Breitbart taking on the Podesta brothers, specifically just weeks before he dropped dead of a heart attack.
Fuck you, John Podesta. What's in your closet, John Podesta? Big Podesta? Big Soros? Do you want us to play these games?
So the timeline of the reported deaths here, August 20th, candidate number 1, a heart attack, age 62. August 22nd, candidate 2, kidney failure, age 58. Reserve candidate, suicide, age 45. Candidate number 3, unspecified sudden illness, age 67. August 30th, candidate 4, stroke, age 71. September 1st, reserve candidate number 2, car accident. Details murky. Sounds a lot like how the CIA operates. Do you guys remember that Rolling Stone reporter, the journalist, who's going after the powerful general and whose car just mysteriously rammed into a tree in a city street going 100 miles an hour? By the way, the 7th candidate confirmed today via sources, natural causes per reports. I'm sorry, Harley, this to me is intelligence activity. What's Germany's version of the CIA?
Well, the CIA and Operation Gladio, it's NATO. The Bundesverfassungsschutz, which is sort of like a cross between the FBI and foreign intelligence, they're the ones who are doing the so-called investigation into the banning of the AfD. But what you have is this is through NATO. It's run through NATO, and it's the same NATO operation, which promoted neo-Nazis in Ukraine to become leaders in the defense and intelligence establishment to keep Zelensky in power. And so what we're seeing is what literally, Sean, and this people will say, well, now you're really going too far. It's not too far. This is literally fascism. Because why are they killing people off? Why are they doing these things? Because they're trying to protect their power. They're trying to protect an unjust system which is crashing. And they're trying to make sure that the people don't have access to information so they can fight back. And the most important thing is that we're now seeing for the first time in Germany the emergence of podcasters. Until recently, I could come on your program or any number of programs in the United States and talk about these things, and people would at least have the option of listening. In Germany, they weren't allowed. In France, look, they're trying to shut down Rumble in France. There's a real European Union cyber warfare operation against independent podcasters. In Germany, the opposite is occurring. They're starting to pop up. And so this is where the hope is that people in Germany are finally waking up.
Well, that's music to my ears because we've had AfD Party members on. Like, what is the gentleman's name? Is it Rainer Rotfuss who's on the program with you?
Rainer Rotfuss, yeah. Rainer's a good friend of mine.
And how's Reiner doing? I mean, he's still alive and kicking, thank God. But honestly, Harley, this is just an outrage. And as the statistics show, this cannot have happened by chance. So maybe we should title this video International Assassination Bureau. When you can't beat them or bribe them, kill them.
That's what we're seeing. It's happening everywhere. They tried to kill the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Fico. There was an attempt recently on one of the leading Romanian opposition figures. Look what Israel did today. Israel helped to organize a ceasefire meeting in Doha and then went and bombed it when Hamas people showed up.
It's just, it's,
This is satanic, what's being done in Israel.
it is.
And by the way, Sean, the Israeli people are finally beginning to, some of them, shake it off and wake up. There's a columnist at Haaretz named Gideon Levy who wrote a column today about the satanic figure who Netanyahu has just placed in the head of the security forces, the Shin Bet. It's a guy who believes that everyone but the most extreme Orthodox Messianic Jew needs to die. This is the guy who heads the internal security in Israel, General Zinni.
Well, by the way, Alex Jones just made this painfully clear on yesterday's broadcast. I already knew this. You already know this. But Netanyahu controls Hamas. This whole thing is a chess game being played out on the world stage, and only the dumbest people in the world don't know the truth. But that's the majority of people because they don't speak this language. They don't know about the Balfour Declaration. They don't know about the Rothschild Zionist State of Israel. All they know about is their Schofield Bible. And if you bless Israel, you too shall be blessed. That's what they believe as literal genocide unfolds on the world stage, Harley.
Well, the Schofield Bible, that's a really important point because where did that come from? The British oligarchy. The so-called Christians, the Christian Zionists, were the British aristocracy. And they created this movement to give them the ability to carry out mass killings from above. I mean, I've written about this extensively. I think you've seen some of what I've written. And the Zionist movement was not about protecting and saving Jews because more Jews are threatened by the policies of Israel. One of my friends who's a defense specialist in Israel said that the least safe place in the world to be right now if you're Jewish is Israel because of the policies of the Netanyahu government. And it's a form of racism, a form of master race, the idea that the Messianic Jews, the ultra-Orthodox, believed that they were chosen to get rid of all lower forms of life. And isn't this an image, a mirror image of the Nazis? And
Well,
that's the tragedy.
all lower forms of life, everybody who's not them. They are among the most racist clan I think to have ever existed on this planet. And I'm just calling a spade a spade. Now, Harley, I would say one of the most unsafe places to be in the world if you're anybody, especially a petite white woman, in this case, a Ukrainian refugee named Irana Zarutska. I'm going to play this. This is the aftermath of this absolute demonic entity stabbing to death this woman for absolutely no reason. Okay, she's just been stabbed. She's bleeding out. Nobody does anything. And she dies on this subway. Now, friends, if that's not appalling enough, let me play you sycophant, lying, scumbag, two-faced, soulless, and vapid Van Jones declaring, "We don't know why DeCarlos Brown committed this crime." Listen to this.
We don't know why that man did what he did. And for Charlie Kirk to say, we know he did it because she's white, when there's no evidence of that, it's just pure race mongering, hate mongering.
All right, if you guys couldn't quite hear that, the black man, DeCarlos Brown, absolutely gushing blood, dripping blood from his knife all over the subway, walks through the subway car declaring, "I got that white girl. I got that white girl." Ladies and gentlemen, this is just as much beyond the pale as the police chief in Minneapolis declaring, "We have no idea why the transgender shot up the church and killed white kids." The transgender who had written on his gun, "Where's your God now?" I think the world has just lost its mind, Harley, but this is what you get when you have bankers ruin your economy, ruin your education system, ruin your country from within. You fold like a house of cards. And I guess at that point, life has no value to some people, like DeCarlos Brown.
Well, it's the post-truth, post-Christian era. And this is something that can be reversed, but it's going to take a real fight, a lot of courage, and I think standing up against the kind of evil that would say that you can't tell why this stuff is happening. You can tell why it's happening. Life has been degraded. And when you turn life into a seeking of pleasure, when you have people like an Epstein, I'll just say one thing on the Epstein case, because I'm about to finish an article on it. Nobody's asking the question of what was Epstein doing to get the money. He was working with the Michael Milken junk bond money laundering gang that wrecked the dollar, wrecked the economy. That's what he was doing. Now, he was also working with the Mossad. He was doing all sorts of other perverted things. But the most important thing is nobody's asking the question of who are the people who gave him $200 million each, Wexner and Leon Black. They were part of the Meyer-Lansky mob. And the Meyer-Lansky mob has been deployed for money laundering, for thuggery and other things for years by the intelligence community, by the bankers. And that's why you have these terrorists who can kill, like the people who are probably pulling off the killings in North Rhine-Westphalia, the Assassination Bureau.
Yep.
That's what we're dealing with.
It's exactly what we're dealing with. And before we part ways, I saw this 2 days ago on Zero Hedge. I wanted to share this with you and the audience. This comes from Steve Watson, Paul Joseph Watson's brother. So we've got the Watson show happening in this episode. World War III, French hospitals told to prepare for a major military engagement within 6 months. Prepare for casualties. Perhaps this is why Macron got the no confidence vote and people want him out of their stinking, rotten, corrupt government. Nobody wants to send their boys and girls into war, into the Rothschild war machine. By the way, it was Mother Rothschild who famously said, Harley, if my sons didn't want there to be wars, there would be no wars. We've come full circle.
Well, that's certainly true. And when you say no one wants these wars, in Germany, to try and recruit to the Bundeswehr, the German army, they're going to the poorest high schools and using drones and video games to try to entice people to sign up for the military. And they're not even able to replace the people who are retiring with new recruits. How are you going to have an army of illiterate, poor video gamers stand up to the Russian army?
Well, get this. Do you know that RFK just let out of the bag the other day that I think 76% of Americans have a chronic disease? And by way of that, 8 out of 10 young people are ineligible to join the U.S. military because they're too sick?
Yeah.
It's the end of an era. Harley, we got to turn this ship around. I really do appreciate you very much. Final words from you, and then tell people how they can find you. By the way, congratulations on being elected president of the LaRouche organization. That's a big deal. Congrats.
Well, I've spent 50 years, plus more than 50 years with the LaRouche organization. I was Mr. LaRouche's spokesman the last years of his life. And my intent is to, what you just said, turn this around. And I think it's happening. I think it's happening. We are at the end of a 500-year era of European colonialism. And the world has had enough of it. When the American people know what's going on, they'll have decided there's enough of it. Look, why did Donald Trump get elected? Trump may not have all the answers, but he certainly did focus people on the fact that there are arrogant, wealthy billionaires who have no interest in your life except to take everything they can from you. And that's why he got elected. Now we've got to make sure he carries out the tasks he said he would, namely cleaning out this permanent bureaucracy that exists inside the government that does the bidding of the oligarchy.
Amen. Here we are over at the LaRouche organization. I'll leave a link below. You can catch Harley's daily updates here. What else should people know, Harley?
Well, we have an online magazine, the Executive Intelligence Review, which Ray McGovern, who used to be the presidential daily briefer for Ronald Reagan, Ray said that the EIR daily update is as good or better than what was being produced by his team in the 1980s for President Reagan.
Well, I can tell you what, it's a lot better than reading books by Henry Kissinger. You know, isn't it funny that the demons live forever and young men like those men in the AfD Party die? I mean, it reminds me of a George Carlin joke. No, it wasn't George Carlin. It reminds me of the old Bill Hicks joke, Harley. The demons seem to live forever while young men die young. While honest young men die young.
Well, we got to do something about that, Sean. And I always appreciate having the opportunity to talk to your viewers because you have people who want to do something. They've just got to do more.
Well, I appreciate you very much, and thanks for coming on. Will you let us know any results from the investigation by the AfD itself of its own candidates being whacked? Because that's what's going on here. Please come back on as soon as you know more.
I have some meetings this coming weekend, so I should have something by next week.
Okay. We appreciate you, Harley. Godspeed. God bless. God bless you and your family, sir.
See you later.
All right. There he goes, folks. Harley Schlanger, the president of the LaRouche organization. Friends, the link is below